Let's talk about something that will make your writing more provocative, more vivid, more compelling to the reader. Let's talk about CIA. I'm not talking about a government agency. I'm not talking about spycraft. I'm talking about concrete nouns, imagery, and action verbs. So what is a concrete noun? Well, I'm going to give you some examples. Concrete, imagine that. Block, sledgehammer. It's easy to see why these nouns would be considered concrete. They're all pretty hard, tough, resilient. But there are other nouns that are also considered concrete nouns that aren't so hard. Leaf, cotton, hand. So what makes a concrete noun concrete? Well, maybe it's easy to understand what a concrete noun is by talking about the opposite. Oh yeah, one more, ball. So what is the opposite of concrete? A noun that's not concrete is called an abstract noun. Let me give you some examples of those. Freedom, disapproval, importance, favorability, anger, position, enemy, love, socialism, fault, solution, mechanism. Now, all of these are still nouns. They still work in a sentence as the same part of speech as ball or block or concrete or leaf or cotton. But the difference is that these nouns exist in our brains. They're constructs, they're ideas. Whereas cotton is an actual substance. It's a type of plant. It's fabric that shirts are made out of. A ball is something that bounces, that can be thrown, that you can visualize coming down the court or wherever. Concrete, it's a substance, it's hard. Now, some of these nouns here on the abstract page, you may think, well, man, that one has some force to it. Like think about the word anger. Man, anger is kind of a noun that seems to have a whole lot of energy and a whole lot of shape, but does it really? Let me give you an interesting statistic. When we think about what it means to be angry, maybe you think that it means frowning heavily, scowling, clenching your jaw. You know, that prototypical angry face. But did you know that not every culture thinks of that as how anger looks? In fact, when people express anger, only about 25% of the time do they actually make that face. So anger, as full of energy and negativity and threat, you know, as resonant as that noun seems to be, it doesn't resonate the same for everyone. It's very different for different people. And that's true of abstract nouns in general. They mean kind of the same thing for everyone, but also not exactly the same thing. But a ball is a ball. A leaf is a leaf. Concrete is concrete. So concrete nouns are more specific. They have more shape. They're clearer and more universal. So let's move on to the next letter in our abbreviation. Imagery. Now, you may think you know what imagery is, and you're not exactly wrong. It's just that when we talk about writing, we're talking about more than something you can see. Oh, it sounds like I'm getting a little bit abstract here, doesn't it? Let me show you what I mean, though. First of all, yes, imagery includes things you can actually see, but it also includes things you can actually hear or actually smell, things you can taste, things you can touch. In other words, imagery is all about the five senses. There are verbs and, well, not verbs, but adverbs and adjectives and other parts of speech that are supposed to describe things that aren't sight, sound, smell, taste, or touch. They're not imagery. Let's look at some of those. So the opposite of imagic description, or description that doesn't use imagery, are the types of adjectives and adverbs and modifiers in general that tell instead of show. Here's some examples, or you'll see examples in these samples. Telling. Johnny was impressive at baseball. We think we know what impressive means, and we think we know how that looks at baseball, except that baseball, there's a lot of different things you can do on the baseball field that would make you impressive as a player. And because of that, we don't know if he's good at bat. We don't know if he's excellent at the pitcher's mound. We don't know if he's a good outfielder. We don't know if he's good at second or first base or a shortstop. We just know he's good at it, but we don't know exactly how. That's because impressive it's a qualification. It's an evaluation, but it's not exactly seeable, hearable, smellable, tasteable, or touchable. It's weak, it's unclear, it's nonspecific, and by the way, it's abstract. Now look at this example. Johnny's glove was a brown blur, scooping the ball from the dust. He flicked it to his left, where the pop and yank of the first baseman's mitt told everyone that Andy was out. Ha ha ha. Now this is full, first of all, some concrete nouns. It's also full of some action verbs, which we'll get to in a minute, but it's also full of imagery. First of all, I can see a glove. Brown blur, that's movement and motion, and brown, so I can see that. Scooping, motion again, ball, dust. Dust has a certain look, it has a smell, it has a certain grittiness, all of those, it's evoking a lot of possible senses. He flicked it to his left, that's a direction. Flick is a very specific kind of verb. Pop is a sound, it's also a sensation. A yank is a movement, but it can also have some sensation built into it. When you have the mitt, first baseman, is a very specific place. So this second sample, it never says that Johnny is impressive at baseball. But don't you know after reading it that he's impressive at baseball? And don't you know that not only is he impressive at baseball, he's impressive specifically at playing probably in the infield. If he's flicking the ball to his left and the first baseman is catching it, yeah, he's pretty close somewhere there. He's probably not way out in the field somewhere. Maybe he's the pitcher, maybe he's the second baseman. I don't know, shortstop. But he's there somewhere, and you know exactly what he's good at. It's more specific. It's more clear. You don't have to say he's impressive. I know he's impressive. I'm convinced. I may not believe Johnny's impressive. You just tell me he's impressive. But when you show me him in action and you show me images, sights, and sounds, and giving me some concrete nouns to go along with it, hey, I'm convinced. Okay, so let's look at the last letter of our acronym. Action verbs. Now, I've already been alluding to these, and I think we already kind of knew what they were anyway, but let's talk about them just a little bit. Here's some examples. Smack, stomp, bite, squeeze, cough, point, stir, sit, inject. Now, some of these seem to be more full of action than others. Like to point at something, that's not like smacking something or stomping or even biting or even squeezing or coughing. And sitting, well, that seems to be pretty passive, doesn't it? True, but there's still actual movement. There's still actually bodily position happening here. These verbs are all about movement and change of position. Inject is an interesting action verb. It can be used, by the way, metaphorically in an abstract way too, but it's also, if it's an action verb, that means there's a needle somewhere, being used. And well, that involves the imagery and senses too, doesn't it? Now, we all have been taught in English at a young age that the opposite action verbs, well, there are helping verbs and being verbs, but those aren't the only kind, but those are definitely one example of verbs that aren't action verbs. Let's look at those. So non-action verbs, being, helping, and then there's some other abstract verbs. Is, was, has, have, will be. These are our being and helping verbs. Frank is here. He was running late. Now we can have dinner, and we will be on time for dessert. These are important. We can't get away from using them. In fact, we can't get away from using all abstract nouns and all non-imagic modifiers either. We're going to have to use some of them. But that doesn't mean we want to give up and try to keep them to a minimum in our speech. They're important for language to work, but that doesn't change the fact that they're still non-specific and therefore weak. Now let's look at some other abstract verbs. Own, he owns a car. Instigate, he instigated a fight. Impress, Johnny tried to impress us at baseball. Punish, improve, hate, love, want, imply, aggravate, mobilize. Now, there's something that all these verbs have in common. We know that none of the verbs on this page, whether we're talking about the being or helping verbs or these other conceptual verbs, they're nothing like sit, stomp, bite, cough, or squeeze, are they? You can't see these things. You might see some actions that fit with them, like if we say someone instigated a fight, well, we know probably whoever instigated it, they fed one person a story and another person a story. They were whispering in someone's ear. But instigate is never exactly the action there, is it? That means it's removed from the actual action. And that means I've fallen back into the trap again of telling instead of showing. When if I actually showed the reader, the person going to this one, gave them the sound of whispering, the breathiness of it, showed them the eyebrows raise and the face become red of the person they were whispering to, then had the sound of that person stomping over to where the other person was and the fight began, right? Yeah, all of that is going to convince me that this first person who began whispering, they instigated, that they did something, they were up to something. And here's why that's better, because now I have lived through it. Now it's real to me. It's not an evaluation on your part that said, yeah, what they were doing was no good. They were instigating. No, I have arrived at the conclusion you wanted me to arrive at, but I did it by living through it because of these action verbs and because of those images of the senses and because of those concrete nouns. So, like I said, we need abstractions to some degree, but the less of them you use, the better your writing will be. Now, that's true of all writing. It's really stressed when it comes to creative writing, whether that be fiction, whether that be poetry, creative nonfiction. These action verbs and these images and these concrete nouns are invaluable. By the way, like I said, all writing will be better the more you have CIA in it. Even essays are better if they've got more concrete and more imagery and more action verbs. They're more compelling. They're more compelling across different spectrums of people. Because like I've already mentioned, abstractions mean different things to different folks. They kind of mean the same thing, but there's a lot of different degrees and interpretations of how that meaning looks. And that's what you're trying to avoid and sidestep. So, in review, why use CIA? Because writing is meant to be read. And that takes readers. Ooh, I know this is deep stuff. If you lose them, then what was the point? A confused reader will stop reading. More concrete means more shape, more clarity. Use concrete to make your work more solid. An unmoved, distant reader will stop reading. More sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and sensations mean more real experience. Use imagery to make your work more vivid and compelling. A bored reader will stop reading. More movement means more energy. Use action to make your work live. Use C.I.A.